So in this news agency
Hmm.
that covers the many wars on Mars, on Titan, on eventually Alpha Centauri,
Hmm.
where does it start? Where is this news station or headquartered?
I would say probably in Alden City, the capital of Mars. And I think at one point I named it the Solar Herald, or at least that's the name I gave it in I think it was actually the story with the reporter who went to Alpha Centauri. I call it the Solar Herald because sort of
Would you equate the Solar Herald to the New York Times? They're a giant mega conglomerate corporation. They control all the news in the in the ICA, right? Like they are the news.
most of it anyway.
They are
They're the most respected voice of media in the ICA.
they're the paper of record.
Yes.
Like they're the New York Times of the ICA.
Yes.
And they're based on Aldrin City. So at the start of the Mars Titan, who's their chief editor?
Now, are you talking Mars Titan War, the Titan Civil War, or
Mars Titan War.
Mars Titan War? Oh, let's see here. Oh, I want to come up with a good name.
Well, give me a description. Well, the name will come with the
I
description.
mean, the only the of course I'm again we talked actually before we started recording about how we both grew up with comic books. The only like
You're
chief
thinking
editor I
Perry
can think
White.
of is Perry White.
Yeah.
So
Or
it's the
J. Jonah
classic.
Jameson.
Exactly, Perry White and J. Jonah Jameson. That's the only two I can think of. I'm going to be someone like that because again, we talk about how these organizations that started as idealistic, young, optimistic, possibly, probably, what do you say? What would you call it? Positive,
Yeah.
hopeful organizations that started during the golden age of space, or maybe a little after. By the time of the Mars Titan War, they're starting to turn. And as with a lot of things in solar space, the Mars Titan War was the inflection point because the Mars Titan War is basically what ended up installing Mars as the sole main governing powers of the ICA because
Mhm.
they came out on top of that war, and ICA sort of signed a what some, especially in the outer system, would call a devil's agreement with Mars, basically saying, "Hey, your military industrial complex will be the police force for the solar system, and as a result, you and the like resource mercantile, the mining and mercantile magnates of the asteroid belt will become obscenely wealthy and basically rule the ICA as a fiefdom. Um, Before the Mars Titan War, it was a little more cavalier. It was a little more Wild West because it was still basically everything was still growing. It was the 23rd century. The 23rd century is 200 something. By the time Mars Titan War happens, that's 270 years from where we are now. But it's still a lot of time for things to develop, you know.
So there's a paradigm shift with the Mars Titan War.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the guy who runs the paper before comes from, maybe he comes from a different time. Maybe he comes from like the mines. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know, and found his way out of the mines like John Samson did. And, but like older, guy in his 60s maybe. He's lived a life. He's seen it all, done it all. I don't know. We'll find a way to flesh him out. Um, Now, how do you think like you work as a science writer, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you sit in a bullpen, you get assignments, they say. How does
Well,
that
my
work
job
for you?
now is a little different, but that's what I did at Goddard. That's what I did when I was working at NASA. Is I was on a news team, a beat, which was planetary science, and we would meet once a week to discuss the progress of our stories and what news stories that were coming out and what events were happening and what things are going on in the agency. So it was very much sort of a newsroom environment. It was mostly virtual. I don't think I ever I think I maybe sat in on one, maybe two in-person meetings ever while I was in Goddard for the planetary team, but
Mm.
that's pretty much what it was. Yeah.
Do you think that, I mean, they'd probably be in person, right? At the
Yeah.
Herald, because
Yeah.
and if they're covering all of solar space, then they're gonna have an enormous presence on Aldrin City, and then they're gonna have spots all over the solar system. Um,
And
and they're gonna have different.
you can't do virtual from across the solar system because of light lag.
There you go.
So you'd have to meet in person at local locations and then report back. And it'd be a game of telephone basically.
There you go. Um, who do you think their star reporter is, and what beat does he cover at the start of the Mars Titan War?
The start of the Mars Titan War.
Is he the guy that breaks the story about Titan being a big ball of ice covered computer or something? Because that to me, right? Like if we're gonna have like a story, like because all of this world building we're doing is in service of the idea of a continuing story of like the Solar Herald.
Mhm.
And for me, the biggest story that you could possibly break is going to be, holy shit, Titan is a computer from aliens.
Yeah, it's a half a billion year old computer that's been covered with ice and methane.
Yeah, and so that's
Or it's icy methane world that was turned into a giant computer, half a billion years ago, and the coldness of the moon is being used to chill that computer so that it can do its cycles.
so who breaks that story? Who finds out about that story? Because he's going to be the most important man in the last 1,000 years. And he's going to be such a danger to the power systems because the paradigm shift makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah,
Like that's if you that's
that's
like
and this is especially when you consider that the revelation of the Ramayana find, which is what they called the original site where the precursor artifacts were discovered, sort of like an entry point to the subterranean computer network. Um, that revelation was basically a leak because the and I'm telling tales out of school about another story that I've worked on briefly and then sort of abandoned, or at least abandoned until later, called The Breakthrough, or which is about it's kind of like, have you ever seen Sphere? It's
yeah.
kind of like Sphere. I just watched Sphere with like my dad and our roommate when I started sketching out this story, and it's basically the same sort of story. It's like a group of, I think it's like five, maybe six scientists from all walks of like all backgrounds, who are assembled on Titan at a volatile time, like a volatile political time in this case, which is basically the brewing conflict between the One Mars Party and the warlords of Titan. And they're asked by the ICA to come in, under strict secrecy, to investigate this find and eventually to try and make contact with whatever beings may have been, whatever beings may be there. And eventually, one of them, or maybe a couple of them, decide to break ranks and contact this guy who eventually becomes a star reporter off of this story to spread the news, because they think, well, the ICA is trying to keep this secret until I can figure out what to do with it, but the people deserve to know. And it becomes an example of how sometimes doing what you think is the right thing by letting people know because they deserve to know ends up being a bad thing, a bad decision. So I'm not necessarily saying that's the case with the revelation of the precursor artifacts, but it's kind of that situation, because these people break ranks and they decide to let the solar system know, and then, as we know, all hell breaks loose, because one of the major outcomes of that revelation is Titan sort of closes ranks around this discovery, uses it as political capital, and that eventually leads that sort of sets off a chain of dominoes falling that leads to the Mars Titan War.
Well, let me ask you this. What if it's this? What if he's not the Solar Herald star reporter? What if he becomes utterly disgraced? And ride with me here a second. He's he's from Titan, but he works for the Solar Herald. He immigrated to Aldrin City and is sent to Titan because he's a local boy.
Mhm.
And it's a fluff piece. It's a joint exercise between the Titan militia and the ICA and the Spacer Corps, right? It's a joint training mission to establish goodwill and good relations between both militaries. And he's a Titan boy, right? But he works for Mars, so he's got kind of split loyalties.
Mhm.
And they're exploring, they're doing whatever, right? They're on maneuvers together and they're maybe somebody falls in some ice and they find the gateway to the Ramananya or however you say the artifact.
Ramayana.
There
I
you
think
go.
it's I say I've always pronounced it Ramayana, but I think because it's an Indian word. It's like the I want to say Ramayana is like the Indian is one of the Indian sacred texts. And
Sure. And so, well, I'm going to call it the artifact.
okay,
And so then the
that's easier.
reporter finds the gateway to the artifact, right?
Hmm.
And so he has a choice to make because he knows what Mars is going to do. Mars is going to claim eminent domain all around this place. Mars is going to slowly but very, very rapidly at the same time take over every single inch of anything with of anything on Titan and squeeze everybody out.
Hmm.
And if he says nothing, all he'll get is a pat on the head from the Solar Herald because they look at him like some dirt farmer, right? He's a hillbilly. He's a hillbilly from Titan, and they're city folk. But he knows if he says something, if he's the one that leaks it. He leaks the existence of the artifact to all of solar space. And when he does, he is besmirched all throughout the Solar Herald. He is. But the interesting thing to me is you got a guy with conflicting loyalties, and then he says, "Oh, if I tell the truth here, then I can really make a difference."
And he doesn't see what's coming because he thinks by telling the truth he can
Mhm.
stop Titan from becoming basically a big experiment for the Martians.
Mhm.
What ends up happening is it accelerates the showdown that's already brewing
Yeah.
between Mars and Titan, which leads to the
Yeah.
Mars Titan War, which ends up leading to Titan being invaded and occupied for 20 years. It
And
leads to
he's
Titan being bombed and people being killed.
and he's the guy that lights the spark,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then his whole name goes down in history as the guy who betrayed uh the ICA to the warlords, to the draconists, whoever they can attach him to.
And the Titan, he'd probably hated as well because they look at him as the person who, initiated their suffering.
There you go.
So he
So
becomes a pariah.
him trying to do the right thing fucks him over every way to Sunday. And I think if we're going to start a series of short stories about reporters, that for me, there's nothing more impactful than the thing that kicks off the Mars Titan War, which kicks off the next century of
Mm-hmm.
conflict in the Spacers Saga. And
Yep.
this one guy, he is fucking Jar Jar Binks, man. And he votes Palpatine emergency powers, you know.
Yep.
And
Totally.
and 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 I'm also kind of reminded too of Star Trek Discovery,
Mm-hmm.
where and I've had a little bit of a rethink on a few things there because for a while I loved pieces of that show. It looked beautiful. Some of the characters were great. The main character starts the Federation Klingon War right? Because she has a hunch and she's really wrong. Like she's so wrong, man. Like and and you know, after they let her out of the clink, they bust her down in rank and they put her, you know, make her or junior enlisted. But it's a little bit of that too, where someone's like, "Oh, we're gonna do this," and then they're just wrong, like to no end. And we don't have that doesn't have to be the main guy, but that could be like an initial sort of like entry point to the Solar Herald.
You'd be kind of like an anthology of serialized stories. Basically, have one period talking about this guy, another period talking about the character that we talked about, who is like maybe trying to make his magnum opus story, and then becomes an obsessive. And then you maybe have someone who people who are like lost in the frontier war or something, or the story of the guy who goes to Alpha Centauri. That could be another one. That's three right there.
Absolutely.
That's a good number.
And you know, and as we write and develop them more, I'm sure they'll kind of expand. And I'm excited to draw on your experience in a bullpen. Because you might have sat in a bullpen once, but you've sat in a real bullpen. Like I was an intern at the local newspaper when I was in high school, right? And I worked at my high school newspaper, but that was 5 lifetimes ago, you know. Um, but I love the idea of that and kind of drawing all of the, you know, there'll be like a Titan beat, right? And there'll be a room, and then having some of the reporters be from Titan, have them just being fucking city people that kind of look down on Titan as hicks and rubes and rednecks and such. And whatever fun, derogatory, pejorative we come up with for how the Martians see the Titans. But yeah, you got anything more to add about the Solar Herald? I think we've sketched out kind of the first
Yeah,
a great starting point for it.
yeah, I think so too. And I want to congratulate you because unless I'm mistaken, you have basically just pitched your first Spacers Saga story. I mean,
Ding!
you've contributed to a lot of other ones and maybe like helped shape other ones that we haven't written yet, and you definitely helped edit a lot of ones that we are working have worked on and are working on. But
Oh
this
yeah.
I think maybe the first time that you've basically conceived of one that we're then gonna run with.
I mean, yeah. I don't know. We're gonna do some stuff with the Samsons. I'm excited to get
Yeah,
into that.
that's true too. I forgot about that. Shit.
Yeah, you're okay.
That's an even bigger one, probably.
Well, that will be a bigger one. But yeah, this is me kind of pitching the pilot for what will be the Solar Herald.
Yeah, the Solar Herold Chronicles,
Yeah. Hmm.
or the Chronicles of the Solar Herold, or should we call it the Solar Chronicle? No,
Could we call it the solar frequency?
it doesn't sound like a proper newspaper name because a
Um,
lot of newspapers use
Herald, Times.
yeah. I mean, even ones that aren't officially newspapers anymore, they still
Yeah.
use those names because it's like it's a historic thing. It's a historicity thing.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Solar Herald it is.
Yeah, because again, I've used that in some outlines, and I think it's a good name.
I also agree.
And I could probably make a pretty good logo for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it feels good to kind of pitch a story on that.
Yeah.
But well, and you're right though, because the Samson stuff, I mean, I think I pitched a story or kind of like the general background of where
Yeah,
John
you
Samson
basically
comes from.
pitch the narrative arc for a new
For
uh
like a trilogy of books and like a
yeah.
setting for the starting point and stuff. But I haven't really pitched to start to finish things. So you're right. That's kind of cool.
Mhm.
You got anything else?
No, I think that's good for me.
All right, for the Blanket Fortress of Solitude, I am Derwin.
I am Nick.